Today we'll be looking at two competing mid-size crossovers in America, the Toyota Highlander and the Honda Pilot. We'll drive through and see how each crossover evolved in technology and style. We'll also see which model years are the best to consider and which ones to avoid if you want to buy used and more. So hop in and let's go for a ride. They say a well-maintained Toyota Highlander can run up to 300,000 miles. So, if you drive an average of 15 to 20,000 miles a year, then this means your Highlander could last you some 15 to 20 years. In fact, almost 19% of owners hold on to their Highlanders for at least 15 years. So let's say you bought one when your son was an infant. Well, it'll last for most of his childhood, youth, and teens, up until he's ready to use it for his first car for college. The Highlander's longevity comes as no surprise, since Toyota has a long-standing reputation for dependable cars. If you haven't seen my video on why Toyotas are so reliable, check it out. It was 2001. At that time, most large SUVs in the U.S. were truck-based. Toyota already had the 4Runner in the U.S. market, a mid-size SUV based on the truck with a full frame. They also had the RAV4, but it was just a compact crossover. Now Toyota wanted something in between. So Toyota started building a new line at the Toyota Miyata plant in Fukuoka, Japan. They were creating the first Highlander. It sat on a modified Camry platform, the unibody structure, and four-wheel independent suspension. The Highlander was well received in the U.S., and Toyota sold almost 87,000 units in its first year. Not bad for a brand new line of vehicles. Honda had also been eyeing the U.S. market. They, too, already had a compact crossover in the U.S. market, the CR-V. So, just a couple years after the Highlanders launched, Honda, too, introduced a mid-size crossover, the Honda Pilot. Pilot was designed specifically for North American market in mind. The original Pilot was built at the Honda plant in Ontario, Canada. It shared the same platform with the Acura MDX, had 3 rows of seats, and claimed that it could fit up to 8 people. In its first year, Honda sold 52,000 Pilots in America, just over half of the Highlander's first-year sales. The Honda Pilot didn't start off as strong as the Highlander, which already had a head start. But a few years later, in 2005, Pilot overtook the Highlander in sales. 143,000 Pilots versus 137,000 Highlanders. Or so it seems at first glance. But if you dig a bit, you will see that Toyota had been keeping busy. In 2005, Toyota introduced the Highlander hybrid version, the world's first 7-passenger hybrid SUV. If you include the Highlander hybrid sales numbers, well, then you see that the Highlander actually won over the Pilot that year. Not long after, Toyota released the second-generation Highlander. It was still based on the Camry platform, but it was bigger and more powerful than the first generation. It was almost 3 inches taller, 4 inches longer, 3 inches fatter, and had an extra inch more in ground clearance. Some people said it looked a bit more like a station wagon. Toyota replaced the 4-cylinder engine with a V6 initially, although the 4-cylinder engine did return the following year. So Honda followed suit. Honda moved its manufacturing from Ontario, Canada, to Alabama, where the second-generation Pilots were born. This generation was larger and came with a V6i VTEC engine, redesigned the headlights and other new features. The vehicle had limited off-road capability and could wade through 19 inches of water. But during this time, America was in a crisis. Turmoil had started a few years back when the U.S. housing bubble burst. That and excessive risk-taking by banks contributed, bringing that global financial crisis and the Great Recession. This led to the automotive industry crisis in the U.S. from 2008 to 2010. Rising fuel costs discouraged consumers from purchasing SUVs and pickups with low fuel economy. Vehicle sales took a nosedive, including that of the Toyota Highlander and the Honda Pilot. 2009 was the hardest hit for both models. It was a tumultuous and unpredictable time period. Towards the tail end of the crisis, the Pilot took the Highlander's total sales in 2010 and 2011, and not just in combustion engine sales, but also including the Highlander hybrid sales. Eventually, the crisis passed. The famine was over, and it was time to feast. The Highlander pulled forward and gained ground again. In 2012, the Highlander exceeded the Pilot sales, and that's not even including its hybrid sales. Toyota then beefed up the Highlander and introduced a third generation. This crossover was almost 3 inches longer and a half inch wider than the previous model. It now sat 8 passengers, not 7. The grille grew larger. That this generation was bigger and bolder conveyed that they were back in business. Meanwhile, Honda too launched its third-generation Pilot. It was sleeker, smoother, and less boxy. This generation Pilot was larger than the previous one, yet it weighed 300 pounds less, had less noise, vibration, and less harshness. The new exterior shape also meant better aerodynamics because it reduced drag area by 10%. In recent years, Toyota recognized that its consumer base was primarily families. They wanted to expand their customer base and also capture the young active buyers and mature empty nesters. To appeal to these additional slices of the market, they fully redesigned and streamlined the Highlander for its fourth generation and upgraded it with more power and cargo. In fact, 2020 Highlanders, interestingly, were the only vehicle in the Toyota family to receive a redesign that year. You can see Toyota's new strategy for the 2020 Highlander, which looks more modern, youthful, stylish. This new generation is also larger in size, this time 2.5 inches longer in length and 2.4 inches wider in the wheelbase and more cargo space, yet it weighs 225 pounds less than its predecessor. This current generation is built on the Toyota new global architecture, which makes extensive use of high-strength steel. This gives the vehicle a stiffer unibody structure while also decreasing its weight. The new platform also has independent strut front and multi-link rear suspension, which means better vehicle dynamics. Few people know that the 2020 Highlander was manufactured exclusively in the U.S. at the Toyota's plant in Princeton, Indiana. Contrast that to versions which were built in multiple locations, including the U.S., Japan, and China. Meanwhile, the current Honda Pilot is at the tail end of the third generation. The 2021 Pilot currently boasts more passenger space and legroom than the Highlander. It is, however, nearing the end of its life cycle. Industry expectation is that Honda is due to kick off a new generation Pilot. The rumor on the street is that Honda will debut the 2022 Pilot later this year and thereby unveil the start of the fourth generation. So you can see why anticipation is high for the upcoming redesign. So what are the Highlander and Pilot's position in the U.S. these days? Well, last year, Toyota sold more than 212,000 units, and that's not including their hybrid sales. Compare that to Honda, which sold almost 124,000 Pilots, so just 58% of Toyota's volume. As far as hybrids go, interestingly enough, the Honda Pilot still doesn't offer a hybrid version, yet the Toyota Highlander is still at it with its hybrid. In fact, it's worth noting that the Highlander's hybrid sales jumped nearly 5 times last year. In 2019, Toyota sold over 10,000 Highlander hybrids, but a year later, in 2020, they sold more than 48,000 hybrids. So, if you're buying a used model, which ones are worth considering and which ones should you avoid? Let's start with the Toyota Highlander. The Highlander is one of the most reliable mid-size crossovers on the market. It's remained pretty consistent with high reliability rankings with Consumer Reports. So, overall, you can't go wrong with buying a used one. For the Toyota Highlander, a few good years to consider include the 2007 model, which had the least number of complaints, and even then, the issues were minor. Also, the 2017 and 2018 Highlanders are worth considering since they also have only minor issues. Nevertheless, even the best of cars have the good and bad years. So as far as used Highlanders are concerned, it's probably best to avoid 2001 to 2005 model years. Those years had the most engine and brake problems. The 2003 Highlander was reportedly the worst year in terms of having the costliest repairs. Usually at 125,000 miles, the engine block bolts give way due to stripped threads in the engine, and this isn't a cheap fix. It's a severe problem, and not all mechanics are willing to fix it. So many owners are forced to replace the entire engine. The cost to fix it was around $3,300. As far as brake problems, the average cost to address was around $500 to $600. Also, NHTSA reported 4 crashes and injuries due to brake problems. The 2008 Highlander had the most number of recalls, 13 in fact. Also, probably good to reconsider the 2019 Highlander. It didn't have many complaints, but a few were reported to NHTSA, largely due to the fuel system, engines, and brakes. Also, avoid the 2015 Highlander because it received the most customer complaints. The most common complaints included uncomfortable front seats and also wind noise when the vehicle is going over 25 miles an hour, which evidently was caused by the oversized side mirrors. Another complaint was about the navigation screen freezing and rebooting. What about used Honda Pilots? Well, the 2015 Pilot is reportedly a good year worth considering. That year stood out in reliability ratings, affordability, and comfort. In fact, the 2015 model had the highest reliability rating compared to all Pilots since 2005. That said, there were 3 NHTSA safety recalls on that model, all having to do with potential issues with the airbags. It's wise to confirm that the auto dealer already addressed these actions. Just use your VIN number and call up the dealer. They can tell you if it's been fixed or not. The 2008 Pilot is another good year to consider. It had an impressively low number of complaints. complaints. But which Pilot models should you avoid? The models that received the most customer complaints included the 2003, 2005, and 2016. The 2003 Pilot received the very most complaints compared to other cars. Its worst complaint was around transmission failure, which cost an average of $3,000 to repair, and also ignition switch problems. But now, what do you think? What's your take on these two crossovers? Please comment below and share your thoughts. And if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to my channel. Thank you for your support.